I'm so happy to be here with Lauren. Lauren and I have been friends for a while, but I've known and admired Lauren's work long before I met her. I teach her stories, so this is kind of a dream come true. We've been saying to one another, we've got to just sit down and talk. We've got to sit down and have a talk about some of the intricacies of our work involving spirit and carnality, and here we are doing it publicly.
We are. This is so lovely. So we were thinking we would just have a conversation. And so the first thing that I wanted to ask you, Jamie, is what is your background in religion/spirituality? Where do you come from?
Right. So I said a little bit in the earlier panel, but not much. I was raised in a denomination called the Church of Christ. It's a really stripped down Anabaptist, no drinking, no dancing. I went to a Church of Christ college, and the rule was the door, if you had a male visitor, the door had to be open Bible width. That was the...
But some Bibles are really thin.
Some Bibles are super thin. If you just have the Psalter, it's even thinner. But yeah, so I was raised in that denomination. So I grew up with rules kind of being... My sense of who God was this man in the sky who had a lot of rules, and if you broke them, you were in big trouble. One of the things about being raised in this tradition, though, is that you read the Bible. That's one of their big things, is they really want you to read it. And when you read the Bible, there's a lot of sex. As you pointed out in your talk last night, you get to Song of Songs, and it's really hard to think God is this man who doesn't want you to have sex. So I grew up with this cognitive dissonance, I would say, between what I was being told were the thou shalt nots, and this is how you are a religious person, and what the actual scriptural text was saying, which was a lot of erotic metaphor and sexual metaphor for God's love for his people, Israel, as you pointed out, or Christ's love for the church as it was reinterpreted in the New Testament. So as I got older, I think that I'm not a part of that denomination anymore, and now I would say we kind of moved into a more high church Presbyterianism, though my husband and I have lately been visiting Anglican and Episcopalian churches. I'm in love with liturgy. I'm in love with ritual and rite and involving the body in worship. I think that's really a big part of what I'm attracted to. I wish I love Catholic rite, but I just can't. I can't go to the Catholic extreme because of the exclusion of women. And but I love it. I love Catholicism too, and all of it really. So all my work is kind of, I think, still exploring these tensions that I grew up with. But what about you? I think you were similarly raised conservatively.
No, I mean, some of it was self-imposed. So both of my parents come from Amish and Mennonite background. So my grandfather, when I was growing up, spoke Pennsylvania Dutch, and it was, and we would go visit, and it was lovely. So my parents come out of this tradition that's really, to my mind, I'm 43 now. It feels very distant and very rigid in some ways, and it probably didn't to them. So when I was a child, we went to the strictest non-Catholic church in town, in Little Cooperstown, New York, which was the Presbyterian church. And it wasn't that strict, but it was 3 hours of worship on Sundays. My dad was, wow. I know, right? Like,
3 hours.
I know. And it was a lot of contemporary atonal music sung by the choir that did not have the chops to sing it. So like the pain of listening was part of the pain of like the sacredness of the day. It was the sacrifice that she made. But I was just a profoundly fervent child. Just someone who is seeking from really, really young something into which I could pour myself. And that became, as soon as I could read and was given a Bible, it was religion in my own very strange mistranslation of the things that I was understanding in the church. Mm-hmm. So I would read the Bible at night, and it was partially the stories, which are amazing, right? Like the stories in the Bible are incredible. As a piece of literature, it's an incredible introduction to the weirdness of humanity. But also the object of the Bible that I was given was so beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. So that the smell of the leather and the thin onion skin of the paper and the gilt, the sort of rosy gilt all the way around. I just love this object so deeply. And so that became part of almost a ritual every night. And I crafted my own very offshoot Presbyterian, weird Mennonite religion that eventually became translated, this fervency, into literature. And that became sort of the realm of my spirit. And recently, I backed away from organized religion for a long time. I'm not a big fan of dogma or misogyny, which occurs a lot in a lot of religions.
Yes.
But recently I've been going to Quaker meeting, which I love so profoundly. I love it so much because
Why? What is it about the?
I think, well, one, there's no single person who's the preacher, right? So there's no sort of hierarchy of spirituality, immediate hierarchy of spirituality. So what I love is you sit in silence with people, and if they are moved to speak, they stand up and speak. And this is a congregation that generally gathers, Jewish people, Buddhist people, Christians from all over the realm, religious people. They're all together sort of thinking, breathing together, and you feel as though you're a bee in the beehive, right? It's really beautiful. Have you ever gone?
I have never gone, but it sounds a lot like a yoga class, honestly.
It
like
does.
I practice yoga, and it's really spiritual. And, I was just reading something that said the word religio actually means connectedness, and it's the same kind of root or word from the Sanskrit as yoga.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's like this connectedness to something bigger and invisible outside ourselves, and it sounds a little bit like what you're describing happens in the Quaker meeting, right? You sense this in the silence and in the breath, this connectedness to everything and everyone, and
And that reminds me of what happens when you are in the middle of a flight of writing, right? When you're actually deep in something very strong and beautiful, suddenly, after many, many months of work in frustration and coming up against your own limitations and the limitations of the text, suddenly something breaks open and you start to sort of breathe through the whole world, right? Everything feels like it's conspiring with you to make this text, and it feels very similar to what you were saying about religio, the yoga, right?
Do you have, when you're writing, ways that you get to that space, or rituals that you enact to get into that space of feeling that connectedness when you're at work?
Yeah. So I came, out of athleticism, and I believe very firmly that actually the daily practice is the thing that makes the work. And this is maybe from running, swimming, doing all the crew, everything that I've done. But also, it's probably from my profound fervency as a child religious person. But every day I get up at 5. That's part of the. I almost feel like a nun who gets up in the middle of the night,
Praying the hours, right? Every 3 hours.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Benedictines,
The Benedictines. And then I get my coffee. That's part of the ritual, and I have a Buddhist mala that it's sort of. I breathe in and breathe out, and I sort of focus my attention and meditate there. Okay. And then everything from then on is just handwriting on a very particular paper. It's very particular. How about you? What are your rituals?
I feel like I need one of these. This is the key that I've been missing, is the Buddhist mala.
Yeah.
Yes. I wish I could say I really admire people who get up at a certain time and just have that daily practice. I tend to write in great fervent bursts where it's horrible for my health and it's horrible for my family's health, but I tend to catch something by the tail end, then I just keep going and going. And of course, that has evolved, because when the children were little, I had a very set hours, and you have still children at home.
I mean, they're old. You'll meet them.
Yeah.
They're 13 and 10. They can take care of themselves.
But still, there's that kind of rhythm that Judy Blume was talking about this morning of you get your kids off to school and then you have these hours and then you know that it's going to come to an end. You pick them up and then the rest of the day is devoted to the homework and the sports and all of those things. So yeah, I don't have any really specific writing rituals other than I do write on yellow legal pads. That's my particular paper when I draft longhand. For some reason, I can be messy on the yellow page, but not on a white page. I don't know why. So, I don't know.
You don't have ritual, but you do have a relationship in your work to sacrament.
Yes.
And it's very interesting and it's very carnal. So can you talk about that? I love
Yeah, we can talk, both of us, about our use of sacraments in our fiction, because obviously Matrix is, well, we'll get to that. But yeah, so how do I want to start this? I think that there's something highly erotic in spirituality, the same way that the medieval women mystics would have said, that eroticism and ecstasy and spirituality and love for God are not disconnected, that they're all of a piece. And so in my work, I often play with some of these religious rituals like the Eucharist and subverting them in some way. So in my first book, I have a scene where at church they demolish the building and kind of form a cult and end up substituting oral sex for the Eucharist. So they're like, Lauren laughs. It's a really weird story. And then my
such a good story.
in my novel, she conceives of this man who's about to kind of take her, and they're about to have this affair. She imagines herself kneeling in front of a priest, and he has this authority of like, I am the only one who can give you what you need right now. I was ordained for this. I will, I am here for this purpose, and there's no one else who can give you this. So all my characters are constantly casting their eroticism and their love and their sexual desire in religious terms, which I think that's just one of my obsessions, as we talked about earlier, and it just comes through. What about you in Matrix and in your other work too? Your use of Catholic ritual and...
Oh, well, yeah, Matrix was a special thing because I had never researched Catholicism, especially medieval Catholicism, which it has a lot to do with contemporary Catholicism, but it's profoundly different as well, right? Just because people back then were profoundly different. And these nuns in abbeys at the time, there's not a whole... there are incredible scholars, some of whom I talked to extensively and got to read my work, who know a great deal about them, but I did not know anything about them until I went into it. And so watching the way that the day-to-day life of these Benedictine nuns in these self-enclosed abbeys was so profoundly ritualized, it was really mind-blowing to me. And then, of course, in Matrix, there are sacraments that are traditionally held within the hands of men. But my book wanted to sort of gently explode a lot of those. And I actually didn't invent anything. There are, for instance, Marie, who's my abbess in Matrix, at one point, there are no priests, they all burned up in a fire. And her nuns are absolutely suffering because they're not giving confession. And so she just says, all right, I'll be your confessor to all of the women of her abbey. And then this seems kind of shocking, except for the fact that women were allowed. You're allowed to give confession to other religious people, and it's in a lot of the texts.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Marie actually says Mass, and there are many scholars who say, well, this would never happen, but it actually did happen. It happened once. There was an abbess in the Middle Ages who did take it upon herself to say Mass. Of course, she was burned at the stake. But I try not to make all that much up.
Wow.
I had to imagine my way in, and you make your way up as you're imagining your way in. But yeah.
Now I'm thinking back to, because I read a version of Matrix early, and I think one of my comments too was like, this would never happen. When I read that scene, and you're right. I just didn't know the research, obviously.
Well, I mean, that's the assumption, right? And that's
Right,
why
right.
it's subversive that people did actually do these things,
Right.
a lot of these things. But of course, there's no single person who did all of them, right?
Right. Can we talk about the sex in Matrix?
Sure.
Because there's no men. I mean, for those of you who haven't read it, there's a medieval, time setting in an abbey with no men.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, there are men in the world, but there are men in the way that a lot of women exist in medieval manuscripts, which is in shadows along the walls without names. I was just sort of flipping the script a little bit. So there are, at a certain point, all the men are banished, and there is sex in the book, and there are actual representations in the historical record of nuns having sex with other nuns. It's a thing. And with priests and having babies and all sorts of things. I mean, this is like, we are base humans and we have urges, right? And we get them out. So there's sex in the book. The thing that I found really funny when I was researching this book is that at the time, the people creating the written interdictions and all of the sort of the written rules by which people have to live were obviously men, right? And not only were they men, they were clerical men. And not only were they clerical men, they were men devoted to chastity and not having sex. So a lot of times their understanding of female physiology was so poor that they did not realize that one could have sex without a penis. Right? Wow. And therefore, if there's no penis involved, it cannot possibly sex, so there cannot possibly be any sin involved. So it's like female sodomy is okay. That's what they call it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
But you tell me about sex in your book because it is powerful. It's in everything you've written so far.
Yeah, I think I've been more obsessed, though, with not the actual sex, but the almost sex, or the before sex, or the after, the memory of sex. I can't remember. Amy Hempel quotes this line. It's either from one of her stories. I think it's from Offertory. Do you know that story by her?
No, I don't know.
Oh, it's so good. And it's a line that's like, I get a bouquet of fresh flowers, and then I put them in a vase with no water and put them in the back of a closet so that they will die and I can enjoy remembering them. Like, just take a look at them and then put them away and enjoy remembering them. So, like, for me, sex in my work is something that I kind of want to do very quickly. And I think Jamie earlier said get in, get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much. So for me, the eroticism is in the almost. So the first book doesn't have any sex, physically consummated sex. And then the second book I push a little further into that. But there's this movement in that book of where she's feeling guilty because of her religious faith, and so she's taking it as this erotic desire resisted as a pathway to God,
right?
Eros as a means of transcendence, and you have to go through the body to kind of get to that religious ecstasy. It inheres here. So even the word ecstasy is out, stasis. To stand outside oneself.
Right.
But every experience we know that produces ecstasy is in the body. It's psychotropic drugs, it's sex, it's exercise, it's breathing exercises, it's maybe listening to music.
And yet in the Church of Christ, which is where you were raised,
no body.
Right, the body is from the material plane, and therefore it is corrupt.
That's right.
And it's the place where sin is. And so how do you reconcile that, right? The ecstasy of the spirit and the dirtiness.
And the dirtiness of the body. I think it's a false dichotomy. I mean, it has to be. It has to be. It's a religiously imposed idea that the body is. And wasn't it Plato too? I mean, it's kind of Platonic too. And the Stoics would have said, body bad, spirit good. But no, we're holistic creatures. We need the body in order to access the spirit, and vice versa.
Is there any religious thread or philosophical thread through the ages that actually accepts the duality?
The duality of the body and the spirit.
That you know of?
I don't. I'm thinking through it. That's a great question to throw out to the audience.
Yeah, right. At some point, yes.
Maybe the Zoroastrians.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. And I do. I mean, it's a struggle, right? Because morality can only be imposed upon the body. Yeah. Right. Right. The body is the source of the things that of the willingness to push against rules, right? The body is subversive in and of itself.
That's right.
Right, and the soul may not be.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that moment when St. Augustine is standing at the window. Oh, that's a different moment. That's the moment with the mom. That's very strange. But
with Monica. Bless her
Monica.
heart. Praying
Bless
for
her
that
heart.
man.
No, yeah, we can talk about that. But what does he say? He says, "Lord, let me be good, but not yet."
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Exactly.
It's like
he's having too much fun with his body.
His body and his soul have that innate split.
I think of a lot of this through the lens of the medieval women mystics, and I know you do too, in the sense of they very much understood that the body was the locus of spirituality, and that I don't think they had this same tension. I think the tension of like body bad, spirit good came later. I was reading scholars that were saying that actually for the medieval mystics, they very much were comfortable with like having visions of having sex with Christ.
Oh yeah.
And just like Christ and sex and God, and there was one woman who had a vision of Christ coming toward her as a penetrating sickle, and another one who wanted to have sex with both Virgin Mary and with Christ. I'm blanking on which one it was. It was like one of those really easy ones to say, like Mechtelberg, or it's God van Bingen, or But truly, I think that there's this intuitive understanding with these visionary women that there is no divide, and that, religious ecstasy and carnal ecstasy, we're given these bodies to experience that, not to shun it and not to, stifle it. But how do you do that in a way that doesn't hurt other people? How do you use your body and experience those things in ways that are not going to bring pain and suffering into the world? That's sort of the struggle.
Some of the mystics did embrace the body. I think there was a very
but not Marguerite Kemp, right?
Oh my God. There are a lot of there was a strange and twisted relationship, I think, with a lot of them, where profound fasting happened, for instance, in order to mortify the flesh. Right. The mortification of the flesh was the way to let your spirit go to a higher plane. So I think you're right. For some of them, there was this sort of imagined desire that was taken into their religious spirituality, or their visions, their ideas about the world. But for some of them, they really went deep into the Simone Weil self-starvation for spiritual beings. Right? Yeah. So that's a fanatical trend that you see throughout history.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking of Marjorie Kemp, because you're right. What they were linking it in their minds and in their imaginations. But you're right, the actual body, Marjorie Kemp told her husband that she wouldn't have sex with him anymore, and he needed to live with her in celibacy. Yeah. And then he began to, rape her. So a lot of that book is about marital rape, which actually in Fire Sermon I also have some marital rape in there, and something that doesn't get talked about and that does happen.
It does.
I've had women come up to me after reading the book and say that their pastors had told them rape is impossible within a marital relationship, because it's that you belong to each other, and that kind of thinking is just so profoundly wrong.
It wasn't illegal until very, very recently, actually.
Really?
Just a legality in the United States of America, there was no rape within a marriage.
Gosh.
I know. Right? I know.
Yeah, it's amazing. Right. So when you were writing Matrix and when you're writing, were there any writers that you were drawing from, or that you loved, or poets, or any
so
particular?
Many.
Yeah.
So, and I want to ask, we'll put a pin in it.
Pin, yeah.
All right. Hildegard von Bingen, who is the greatest mystic. I love her very desperately. I still love her. I didn't exorcise my love for her, which sometimes happens when you write a book.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, there it is. Bye. But for her, I still listen to her music. She was a composer. Her music is unbelievably beautiful.
Is it that like monotonal, kind of almost Gregorian chant sounding?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's monotonal, but
No.
yeah, but it is. It's chanting. It's a lot of chanting. It's very, very beautiful. It's eerie. It feels alien in some ways. But she also was a medicinal sort of forerunner. Like she wrote a book that was used for 400 years after her death. But she's also an abbess who used her mystical visions in order to create a space to protect the women under her aegis. So she's able to use these hyper-abstract things to make a concrete difference in the lives of these people around her, which I thought that, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, that's what mystics are doing. They're pulling power into themselves through the Word of God in a very fascinating way. They're using their bodies and their minds in order to create space in a place where women didn't have space, especially the female mystics. Yeah.
Yeah. So I absolutely love
Yeah.
that way Marie becomes this kind of capacious, like she grows in stature and she grows the lands and she grows the abbey and she grows in her visions, and all the while inside of herself, she's kind of becoming almost smaller or trapped, so that she's almost in a box by the end. And I love the way that you absolutely expand that, the way that Hildegard von Bingen was so expansive and like
So
polymath
expansive, yeah.
and Marie's.
Thanks.
I can see Marie as her successor or her inspiration.
So there are lots of other books too, but instead of getting to them, I'm going to ask you, who are the writers, poets, even musicians that you rely on to sort of feel your way into religious ideas, spiritual ideas in your work?
A lot. I do love poetry. I love Jack Gilbert's poetry. There's something about reading Jack Gilbert that always kind of opens me up. I love Sharon Olds. I love Linda Gregg, who was married to Jack Gilbert for a while. So yeah, reading poetry always kind of does it for me. We talked about Gerard Manley Hopkins earlier.
I love him.
Amazing.
Can I tell
sonically.
you?
Yes, tell me.
So I have nights of despair. I have a lot of insomnia, and I am also very worried about the state of the world. And being an angsty person in the middle of the night, all alone with your beloved husband snoring next to you, is like a horrible thing.
The worst.
It's the worst. And so sometimes when I'm feeling these washes of despair, I will tell myself at least the first stanza of Carrying Comforts by Gerard Manley Hopkins, which is, I'm just going to do it. If
Do you
that's
say
okay.
it? Please say it.
Just the first stanza. I don't know the second stanza, but it's not, I'll not carrying comfort despair, not feast on thee, not untwist slack they may be these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more, I can. Can something, hope, wish day come, not choose, not to be, but oh, thou terrible, why wouldst thou rude on me, thy winged world, right foot rock, lay a lion against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, oh, in turns of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. I love it so much.
Oh my gosh,
No. Because I say this to myself, and it's really hard to get all the words in the right order. And so eventually, if you say it over and over enough, you feel like you have a ghost with you, in bed with you, a Jesuit, like very greenish Jesuit little man. He was described as greenish all of his life.
Greenish?
Yeah, he had some sort of like intestinal issue. But I
don't want to be sleeping next to
you
him.
have him there with you, and you have his voice, and you have his despair, and you know that the poem is, it is sort of a souvenir that he was able to come out of it. You know what I mean? It's almost something to cling to. It's a raft that someone else was there where you are, and you can come out of it with this help. And that's what his poetry does for me.
It's amazing. And sonically, just the rhythms of hearing you recite that, it's like a lullaby almost.
It is,
It takes
yeah.
you back to that childhood, like, now I lay me down to sleep.
Yeah.
That kind of iambic rhythm of just, it's peaceful.
But it's very angry. He's very angry at God.
Right. But the way you recited it didn't sound angry. But the words are angry, but then the cadence and the like poetry of it is so beautiful that it's got that beautiful, wonderful tension. But what was he? Let's talk about his anger at God.
Well, actually, so I think for 8 years he gave up poetry because he thought it was dragging him away from God in a certain way, and that makes me so sad because he's such an ecstatic poet. I mean, he is very weird, right?
Yeah.
I think he was angry. He was a Jesuit. He had to eventually end up teaching classics in Latin, and I just feel like he was just uncomfortable in life. I mean, all of the terrible sonnets, they're called terrible sonnets. They're really wonderful sonnets, but they're terrible as in God is terrible, terrifying. Yeah. All of the terrible sonnets are sort of like a cry from a crushed human, right? And I think that those poems are so necessary in particular.
Yeah. And that's such a hard thing as you're speaking, and you're saying that he gave up poetry because he felt that it took him away from God. I can relate to that because of the way I was raised. I think in a lot of the reaction from my community to some of the more subversive things I'm writing has been really hard. Like I do stay up at night and wrestle. Like, am I walking away from God in writing? And that's a horrible thing to have over you. So
what is the reaction? Tell the story.
Just with my first book, especially that story I mentioned with the communion kind of being substituted with oral sex. Of course, I meant it in a fabulous sense. And if you read the story to the end, the parishioners who destroy the church and form this cult end up in stasis. They're frozen. The kudzu is growing over them. And their children, are going off into the woods and they're building and they're singing. And, sort of what I think the story was wanting to say, I didn't know this as I wrote it, was that the complete eradication of all orthodoxy, all rule of using your body in any way to see fit. This is kind of the result. Is this stasis that you stop, that you have to have something to push against in order to grow. And so I was exploring that, but I think that members of my community saw it as I was saying something about our church in particular, or maybe about Christianity, and I was told that by a close friend that she threw it across the room. There's a story in there called Sinkhole where a teenage boy and girl have sex and it doesn't go badly for them. There's no consequence. They enjoy it and it heals them both. And she said that was not moral because sex before marriage was wrong, and therefore if teenagers have sex, that they should show the consequence of that decision. And those kind of comments, when you're raised a certain way, I know they're wrong. I know they are. But in my dark moments at night when I'm up with insomnia, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I need to not ever write about God again. Here we are on a panel about that. But in my sane moments, I know that's not true. But I can relate to Hopkins, and I'm going to memorize that. That's amazing.
Have you ever lost someone you loved through your writing?
No.
Okay, that's good.
No, I did have my mother. There's a short story called You Look Like Jesus. And this is another one of these where they're texting each other selfies of the feet and the ear. They're playing around the edges of having this affair. It's long distance. And then at one point, she sends a picture of her top. And then he sends her a picture of himself nude, laying back in the kind of in a crucifix position, and he has an erection, and he says, and what do I look like to you now? And then the story ends, but the title is You Look Like Jesus. So it's one of those echo kind of stories. And my mother was absolutely mortified and told me it was blasphemous, and I said, so here's what I said. I said, Mom, what if the point of that story, is to show that something so destructive, when you're in this kind of an illicit relationship, and it can feel cosmic, it can seem divine, it can seem ordained, it can even seem from God, and that something that maybe is harmful might look like Jesus to a person in this situation. And then she was okay. So I kind of wove my theological way through that one.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Once I wrote a story and my mom didn't talk to me for 3 months. So yeah, this
no.
happens. It happens, right?
Did your story have nude selfies and in crucifix position?
No, it was. I thought it was a love story to her. She didn't take it that way.
Oh,
It's
no.
okay. She likes me now.
You're okay
It's
now.
fine.
That's good.
I think once in a while, people get very tender when they are related to a writer. They get super skinless and vulnerable, and you have to
Yeah.
train them into losing that.
Yeah, it's so true. Okay, before we do the questions and all that, though, can we talk about the haunting?
Oh,
We've done a couple events together, and I keep wanting to talk about it. Is that okay, or do you want to go to questions?
I'm a person who sees ghosts. I see them everywhere. Do you see ghosts?
No, I see other things, but
Okay.
we'll talk about that after.
You see devils. So the last time Jamie and I talked, I think I was in a castle in Italy, which sounds wonderful. It was wonderful. Sometimes in the life of a writer, there are these things that come down from the heavens and you don't know how you get them, and then you just take them and you hold them to you for the next 15 years. And this is one of those things. So it's a 15th century castle in Italy, and they just say, hey, you were nominated, come. And you're like, all right. And this was in June, too, when after pandemic, a year and a half, I was pretty insane, actually, at the moment. And I was living in a room off the library. And it felt weird to me, even in the daytime. It felt I could feel some sort of strange electricity in the corners. And then at night, slowly, this was building and building, the door started creaking open, and it's probably a 500-pound door, right, from the 15th century. And I know that I had locked it and bolted it the night before. And so I would turn on the light, get up, do it again. And then slowly worse things started happening. Like there were footsteps going really swiftly around and around in the library outside my door. The lights were starting to go flicker on and off, and no one was there. And then the door, instead of just slowly opening, started being thrust open really fast and like hitting the walls and making this huge boom. And finally, I go to one of the amazing cleaning women, and I was like, I'm really sorry. Is this place haunted, by the way? And she's like, oh, I will lose my job if I tell you, but yes. And she said, apparently, it was a nun who lived in the room next to the chapel, who was pregnant.
Oh my God.
And I had just finished the edits for Matrix, in which there was a pregnant nun, and I was like, I don't know what it is, but maybe it's my nun. Yeah. So it was, and eventually I would, like, in the night, I'd just have to sit up in my bed and be like, I know you want my attention. I don't know what you want. I'm going back to bed. I'm trying to do this in my terrible Italian. And then I left. So she's definitely still haunting, but not me.
That's so interesting. I mean, I know we're supposed to be talking about body to spirit, carnal to like God, but I mean, that truly is like an actual spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And that she came to you.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
I've seen so
mystical.
many ghosts. Anyway, we're supposed to open it up to questions now.
To be continued.
I would love
we'd love
to get some questions. Oh, lovely.
Hello, how are you? I just, whether you interpret it as spiritual or not, I would like each of you to give one positive adjective for desire, and one negative or pejorative for desire.
Wow.
I'm here all week.
Ooh. You go first.
Oh my. Well, I know my pejorative one is shame. It's shame. I'm working really hard on shame, maybe guilt and shame. I think that's just something that a lot of us, and women in general, who want to feel desire, express desire, there is inherently, and it's getting less so, but there's just something with shame, and maybe me, but I think women too. A positive thing for desire. I love the almost, as I said earlier. So maybe I know almost isn't an adjective, but maybe I'll stick with the word almost desire, because to me that's the most luscious. That's the most luscious part of desire.
I'm cheating, and I'll say, I'll find you later. I'm so sorry.
No fair.
I don't know.
Maybe go
That's
first.
the hardest question I've ever been asked,
It is really-
ever. I will tell you, I don't know, other secrets instead. I would rather not answer that. Thank you.
Dang it! Now I'm gonna have to come
but
up with something
talking
better.
about shame. Yeah, shame is
Shame.
yes, yeah, and it's not just religious shame, right? It's like there's profound
shame.
body shame, and being a woman, there's shame.
That's right.
Yeah, being a mother, profound shame there. Actually, when my kids were born, I pretended that I didn't feel shame about how I was going to be a mom, and eventually that became true. And so
Okay.
no, I have no shame.
Fake it till you make it.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I know.
Yeah. No. If you ever get that question, how will you be a mother and a writer? Like, how do you balance that? And I just can't stand that question. Right?
Yeah.
Just-
Well, I actually went slightly viral once because I said I wouldn't answer it until I heard a male writer ask that question.
Exactly.
But I have heard a male writer ask that question. Yeah, so
Good.
now I have to answer
Good.
it.
Now you
when
have to
people ask
answer.
it.
Well, I'm
I
not-
don't
I'm not
have
asking-
to. I don't have to answer
Yeah.
anything.
No, you don't. You don't.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. There's one right here. Yeah.
Here and here. Oh, that breeze feels so nice.
Oh, the breeze is amazing up
Are
here.
you getting the breeze down there too?
Oh, good.
So nice.
Hi, thanks to both of you. Earlier, when you were wondering aloud about a spiritual tradition that integrates, the body,
Yeah.
I thought of Tantra within Buddhism,
Oh, yes.
and made me think of my favorite definition of Tantra. Granted, it's by a Western man, Daniel Odier, but he says, when you're thirsty, drink water. Hold on. Yeah. When you're thirsty, drink water. Imagine the water loves you as much as you love it. Now live your whole life in that spirit.
Oh, I love it. That's so good.
Yeah, so there's this mutuality. So I wanted, earlier you talked about risking relationships, right? And knowing that after 3 months, your mother would maybe come around. But is writing your great love even more than your love of people sometimes? And if so, is it mutual? Do you feel like the writing loves you back? And if so, how?
I can say this because my family has not arrived yet in Key West. Don't tell them. Yeah, it's the boulder around which I built my entire life, and it was there before them. And I obviously love them desperately. I would lay down my life, but I think it was my first child, the work. And I would never starve my first child to feed my flesh children. Yeah. So the answer is yes for me. And that's fine. They're all used to it. And I do think it doesn't always love me back. Sometimes it truly hates me. But you sit with it, and you try to love it. And I think eventually it'll come back. It comes back. Yeah.
That's such a good question. I don't think that I love my work more than I love my family. And I wish sometimes that I did, because I am very quick to prioritize, even now with grown children. If one of my 20-year-olds is like, hey, Mom, let's take a run or let's go for a hike, I will not write, and I will do that, because I think I won't always have this child to do this with, but I will always have my work, which is actually not true. That's wrong thinking, and it prevents me from being as productive as you are. Truly, I need to be more in love with my work, and I need to believe that it loves me back a lot more than I do. But this does remind me of have you read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert? Someone just gifted it to me. I read it on the beach in a day, and she tells this story about the Anne Patchett story about how ideas are just kind of out there, and they pick people they love. And they come to those people and they say, I have this idea. And so she had one come to her about this Midwestern woman who fell in love with her boss secretly and then had to go down to the Amazon jungle to deal with this kind of corruption. And then something happened in her life. She couldn't write it. She put it aside. She met Anne Patchett 2 years later. She's like, Anne, I love you. And Anne says, and I love you. Liz Gilbert gives her a kiss. And then 2 years later, they're having lunch, and Anne Patchett's telling her about this novel she's working on, and she starts telling it, and it's State of Wonder. It's literally, like, so specifically to, and Liz Gilbert says she believes big magic, that idea loved her, but she didn't love it back. Or it wasn't the right time to love it back. And so it went and left her and found someone else. And that's so mystical and weird, but I kind of love thinking about the work, and whatever book I'm working on is that thing that's coming to me, and that I need to listen to it, and I need to honor it and enflesh it, or it's gonna go find Lauren, and she's gonna do it much better than I do it. So yeah, that's a great question though.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you guys both. This has been awesome. Mine is not a question, but more of a comment, sort of piggybacking on what she said. Charles Williams, who's a contemporary of C.S. Lewis and Gerard Tolkien, one of the Inklings, had a really interesting theology called romantic theology, in which sex is worship. So there's been a lot of really cool studies. Williams is kind of a weird guy. He whipped women with swords and stuff. That was his. Yeah, he was married, but he had a lot of groupies and stuff.
Yeah.
He loved the sword thing. He was kind of into Rosicrucianism and stuff too. So he was he was like an Anglican, but he kind of had a
He was a
side
progressive
religion.
Anglican.
Yeah, he had a side theology. But yeah, he actually he has a book called Outlines in Romantic Theology, which actually talks about how, I guess, consummation is worship, and so by having sex with your wife or whoever, he doesn't really specify, but like by doing that, you are actually experiencing God.
Yeah. Lewis gets into that too. Like Lewis
Yes.
loved Williams, so he gets into
Yes.
that in The Four Loves, which is a book I absolutely love. Lewis was into some weird shit too.
Yeah.
Like sadomasochistic, like really interesting. People think of C.S. Lewis as this kind of like little British man, but he had some interesting, wild ideas. Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Haven't we all?
Should we try it? Should we get drunk tonight, see what happens? Dry January.
This actually reminds me, so we never actually finished our question about who the spiritual writers or the religious writers that we go back to again and again.
Yeah.
And one of mine is a Key West writer, or was, or maybe still is, Joy Williams, who I know that you love as well.
Joy, yeah.
And she once said, and I love this so much, and it has clarified so much for me, that one of the differences between a novel and a short story is that a short story has something anagogical to it. And the anagogical is from the Greek for upward. It has something to do with looking toward the afterlife or toward God in it. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh. Yeah. And then I went back and read all of her short stories, and they all have something that sort of lifts a little bit off the ground toward God, or a lot off the ground toward God. Not her novels necessarily, but definitely her short stories.
Yeah. I want to say that maybe her father was a Congregationalist minister or some kind of minister. I'm not sure. But right, like Flannery O'Connor said, that the writer operates at that particular crossroads where time and place and eternity meet. And it's kind of that lift off to the eternity part that I feel like Joy Williams shares that. And I love Flannery O'Connor. She's also, although we could talk about Flannery O'Connor,
I have problems. I love her, but I have problems with her.
I have problems with her endings. We're off topic now, but I feel like she's kind of formulaic after a while. But again, she died at 39.
Yeah, who knows what she could have done.
Yeah, who knows what she would have done. But yeah.
Yeah, no, she's a major, a master writer. She hates people. She really does.
You know that in her letters. She's so funny. God, her letters are just those first letters when they won't take her work, and she's like, I don't want to write the kind of book that you want to sell, so goodbye, good luck. She's great.
She's great, and yet I don't want to live with someone who hates people, right? I don't want to live in the brain of someone like.
Do you see that in her work, or like more?
Oh,
in her,
yes.
You think she hates people?
Humans, all humans, all humans are bad.
I would love to
sinful.
know, like what story Do you think that's most apparent? Where the grandmother, she would have been a great woman if someone would have been there to shoot her every day of her life.
Okay, exactly.
I love that. It's
right?
great as anyone.
Right, yeah.
I know women like what. Like,
Is it, I mean, can you think of a Flannery O'Connor character that actually she manifests love toward as an author? There aren't any. There aren't any.
oh, did someone just say? I couldn't hear it.
I couldn't hear you either. I'm sorry. Is that Eudora Welty?
Yeah, that's.
I think.
Yeah, Eudora Welty.
Yeah.
Oh, Eudora Welty. We can talk about Eudora
do love
Welty. She's amazing, and yeah. What about Parker? Parker's back.
Who?
Parker and Parker's back. The one with the tattoo of Christ.
Maybe.
I don't know. Let's keep talking about this. This is a challenge. Come find us if you can think of a character in Flannery O'Connor that she manifests love toward.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
We are fine to go also.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are manifesting love toward you.
Yes.
By leaving
enjoy
early.
enjoy the breeze and the weather. Thank you.